Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our next episode of ReWalk's Topics in Neurorehabilitation webcast. I'm Kathleen O'Donnell, and today we'll be talking with one of the leading researchers in exosuits for post-stroke rehabilitation, Lou Awad. I met Lou back when we were both working to develop and evaluate the first robotic exosuits at the Wyss Institute at Harvard University. Lou is now an assistant professor of physical therapy at Boston University and the director of the Neuromotor Recovery Laboratory, where his research aims to evaluate and support innovations in rehabilitative technologies and to leverage these advances to further the science and art of neurorehabilitation. Hi, Lou. It's great to talk with you today.
Thank you, Kathleen. Can you guys see the video? I think I got it going. Yeah. You know, I actually really enjoy giving this talk, especially to clinicians and engineers, because I think at a high level, we understand that movement is this multidimensional process, but we don't really grasp fully the fundamental aspects that make human bipedal walking on two legs, very special. So who knows what the title of this talk may be referencing? May the propulsion force be with you. You can mouth it. I think I can see some of your faces. So if you said Star Wars, you'd be right. And so Star Wars has this magical energy that a select few of individuals could use to move objects through space and move other people through space. And it's you know, this magical energy that allows us to, or allows them in the Star Wars universe to bypass the laws of physics and move people through space. And growing up, me personally, I watched Star Wars and Star Trek and was always fascinated by the technologies that they presented to the public. And whereas starships and hovercrafts and laser guns were very common to both shows, Star Trek did not have the Force. And if you ask my wife, she would say, dude, you're geeking out at this moment, but you know, leading to an important point. Star Trek didn't have the Force, but they did have transporter technology. So this idea of advanced technologies to move through space is something in the sci-fi world that's you know, dominant across whatever show that you look at. And what I want to get to is the fact that even though we don't have the Force or transport technology to move us about our world, in our reality, we have created very impressive propulsion technologies that do a large part of the work of moving us around. And when I say propulsion technologies, I just mean a means of creating force that leads to movement. And if you flew here today, or if you flew anywhere, you took advantage of jet propulsion technology. And if you drive to work every day, you took advantage of car propulsion technology. And if you're a bike commuter, you leverage a form of human propulsion that is augmented by the mechanics of your bicycle to allow you to travel faster and farther than you would be able to on your own. Now, we don't need machines for propulsion. We are a neuromechanical system, a neuromechanical machine that's actually built for propulsion. Neural commands generated in our brain and subcortex are transferred through the spinal cord to groupings of muscle that, when activated in a particular way, act on our skeleton and in turn act on the ground to propel us forward through space. And for people with neuromotor impairments, we have built very impressive technologies that can support their full body weight and completely take over the physiological act of propulsion. And recently, we saw how impressive this human and machine integration could really be. I'm sure most of you guys are aware of the story. Here's Terry, a New York, wearing a paralyzed vet who wore the ReWalk exoskeleton to complete the New York City Marathon. For non-ambulatory individuals, like vets with spinal cord injuries, we know we have to completely replace their lost propulsion function. And that can mean anything from a wheelchair to a powered ReWalk. But for ambulatory individuals, such as the majority of people post-stroke with multiple sclerosis, with Parkinson's disease, restoring propulsion is a very different undertaking. On one hand, they're already walking and thus already able to achieve propulsion. But on the other hand, they are doing it through a non-physiological strategy, and that has very important clinical consequences. What I'm showing you here is, let's see if I can get my pointer going. Showing you here is a video showing how asymmetric propulsion can be in an ambulatory individual post-stroke. If you just look at the person walking up here, he's doing a decent job advancing the limbs on this treadmill. And if you measure how much force he's able to generate on the ground with each of these legs, and you looked at the non-paretic limb and the paretic limb, you can see that the non-paretic limb is generating 18 times the force of the paretic limb. Now, although we can't see this deficit, at least not easily, it does have major consequences. And to appreciate why walking with asymmetric propulsion is not desirable, it may be helpful to first review why human bipedal walking is what it is. And to quickly summarize, and this is perhaps an oversimplification, I'm happy to answer questions, it's because walking the way we do, with legs, is very economical. So let me take a step back to explain. Walking consists of alternating periods of single support and double support. During single limb support, the body rises and arcs over the stance limb, and it gains height. And with it, it gains what we call gravitational potential energy. Now, have you guys heard the saying, what goes up must come down? That's basically a simplification of gravitational potential energy. So as the body gains height and it's at its highest point with the body over the leg, the stance limb, at this point in time, to move forward, all you need is gravity. Gravity just pulls you straight down. Now, the problem is you're going down, and people have talked about walking as controlled falling. I like to think about it as controlled propulsion, because as you go down, your body has to be redirected from a downward and forward to an upward and forward trajectory. And this happens during that double support phase of the gait cycle. Now, something happens to cause that to happen. Something generates a propulsion force that acts on our body that makes us move in that direction, and that's the plantar flexor muscles contracting. The plantar flexor muscles are a grouping of muscles, the gastrocnemius and the soleus muscle. They attach to the skeleton via the Achilles tendon. And when they contract, they pull on the heel, they cause the foot to push into the ground. And if you measure the full body dynamics, you would see that the force generated by the ankle is over 2 times the force generated by the large hip muscles. Like our hip muscles are these huge muscles that span our trunk and it's our femur. But the ankle muscles, these small things at the end of our feet, generate more than 2 times the push-off work. And when you look at the knee and the foot, the muscles that span the knee and the foot, they're actually generating negative work. They're actually absorbing energy instead of generating positive energy. Now, in a study that we ran in our lab, we looked at the relationship between propulsion here on the x-axis and the energy cost of walking here on the y-axis. Now, the energy cost of walking is like the economy that your car gets. So miles per gallon, we think about a car that has good economy gets more miles to the gallon. Well, for human walking, we think about using less energy per meter walked makes you more economical. And healthy people walk with an economy that's under 0.2 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per meter moved. And in people post-stroke, they can get as high as 0.6, even up to 0.8 milliliters of oxygen. That's a substantial difference. It's like driving, a Hummer that takes 5 miles to the gallon versus, Prius, or not quite a Tesla, not yet. We're not that economical. But this over here is how we actually measure propulsion asymmetry in our lab. And you guys don't need to know this, but I figured I'd just show you so you understand what I'm talking about. When we walk, each limb generates a braking force. It's this negative force here. And then a propulsive force. It's the positive values above the 0 line. You can see the paretic limb and the non-paretic limb, their braking is comparable, at least for this person, but their propulsion, you can see it's much lower in the paretic side than the non-paretic side. And it's also earlier in the gait cycle. Now, the consequence on the energy cost of walking or your economy, I'm going to show you one person here, and these are 4 different speeds that he was walking at with 4 different propulsion levels. So as he gained propulsion, so this point here versus this point here, all the points in between, you can see that more propulsion was associated with less energy being utilized. And if I bring up another 7 individuals, you can see that the same relationship is true within each of these individuals. Each of these colors is an individual, and across individuals. So this person over here in orange, he is the most economical, using energy cost of walking about 0.2 milliliters of oxygen per meter ambulated. And he also has the highest propulsion levels. And this person in green, lowest propulsion and highest energy cost of walking. Now, the reason why energy cost is important, aside from the fact that we've been built as a human machine to be economical, is that this is related to how much activity we can do in the real world. What I'm showing you here is the relationship between propulsion, and that force generated by the paretic limb to move the body through space, and how far a person can walk in 6 minutes, the 6-minute walk test. And you see that those with low propulsion, under 5% body weight, they walk very short distances, so 200 meters. So I tell someone walk as far as you safely can in 6 minutes. They can only do 200 meters if they have under 5% propulsion. In contrast, those with 20% propulsion from their paretic limb, this is about normal levels, they're walking 500-600 meters, right? And the 6-minute walk test, this metric over here, is in people post-stroke and people with multiple sclerosis and most neurological diagnostic groups, it's the single best predictor of community walking activity. So steps per day over here on the y-axis, this is giving people like an activity monitor, like a Fitbit or something that can monitor how many steps they take in their day-to-day lives, and giving it them for 7 days, and we take the average of 7 days of walking activity. And you can see there's a wide range. Some people who are barely walking in the community, close to 0, and those who are walking 14,000 steps per day. And the relationship between steps per day and this measure that we take in the clinic, the 6-minute walk test, it's positively correlated. Those who can walk far up here, they walk more steps in the community. And those who don't walk very far, they don't walk many steps in the community. So propulsion is a key determinant of distance, and distance is a key determinant of real-life mobility. Now, one would think that given the importance of propulsion to normal, healthy walking, that we would have a number of interventions in the clinic available to treat propulsion impairments. And the problem is that is not true. In fact, the standard of care for post-stroke ankle deficits is the ankle-foot orthosis. And don't get me wrong, the ankle-foot orthosis is a crucial assistive technology. It's one that people post-stroke rely on as soon as they leave the hospital to walk safely. But for those who know what the ankle-foot orthosis does, is it holds the ankle in a 90-degree angle. There are hinged orthoses and there's spring leaf orthoses, there are all sorts of different ones. But at the end of the day, what they end up doing is they restrict the plantar flexion of the ankle, and that leads to a reduction in the force that can be generated for push-off by that limb. So what we end up having is we solve one problem, the ground clearance problem, and create another problem, a propulsion problem. The problem is, and so many problems, the problem is that ground clearance, if you're going to fall, who cares how economical you're going to be, right? So that's why we go down the path of prescribing ankle-foot orthoses and other assistive technologies that make you safe to walk at the cost of walking slow, asymmetric, and inefficient. And it's not just AFOs, it's also compensatory strategies like circumduction, hip hiking, where you rely on the hip muscles to help advance that limb to compensate for the stiff-legged gait and the impaired in the foot drop of the ankle. And this is what I call independence through compensation. So we can achieve walking independence through compensation. But like I was saying before, this comes at a consequence. And it's that walking is slow, asymmetric, very inefficient, and highly unstable. So they can walk, but they don't walk very well. And ultimately, they don't walk very far. And that leads to poor health and reduced quality of life. Now, this is from a walking in the real world perspective. The other side of this equation here is rehabilitation. And regardless of the phase of rehabilitation, it doesn't matter if you're in the acute, subacute phase or in the chronic phase. At the end of the day, our interventions are only effective if they cause the nervous system to reorganize and remodel in a way that promotes improved movement. And the field of neuroscience and rehabilitation has converged on these parameters to promote the most effective rehabilitation interventions. And that's variability, intensity, repetition, and task specificity. Variability is being able to walk in different contexts. So walking level ground, up a hill, down a hill, different terrains, stepping over objects. It's variable movement in the domain of walking. Intensity is being able to walk at fast speeds, generate high heart rates, being engaged in the therapy. This is the challenge with systems like the Locomat. Patients can just ride the system and they don't actually engage in the movement therapy. And I know recent versions of the Locomat have opened up some degrees of freedom, changing a little bit the intensity, but at least the earlier generations, that was a main limitation of that technology. And then repetition is just repetition. More practice leads to better gains. And then task specificity is if you want to improve walking, you better be training walking. You don't train seated hand movement with a bicycle in order to improve walking. Yes, this can improve your cardiovascular capacity, and that might lead to downstream changes in walking, but it doesn't actually help the movement or the control of walking. To do that, you have to train walking. And the challenge, though, is that the limited mobility and capacity of people post-stroke, even at like their peak after their stroke, when they're about to be discharged from the rehab hospital, they are far from where they were before their stroke. And that leads to a reduced ability to walk in variable contexts, high intensities, with high repetitions, and in a task-specific manner. And this is where we think exosuits can come into play. And our central hypothesis is that exosuits, these textile-based wearable robots, they can interface with the paretic limb of people post-stroke to restore plantar flexor function. The plantar flexor function is crucial to propulsion, and by extension, increase the speed, stability, and economy of walking during rehabilitation, and ultimately facilitate more optimal gait training.
Thanks, Lou, as always, for a fantastic presentation. One of the things that I really love about this talk is that it helps to illustrate, why paretic propulsion is so important. And not just because of the changes that we can measure in a lab, right? But in terms of the impact that it has on the broader patient quality of life and improved function. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to gloss over or miss something because it seems like a relatively small improvement in the clinic or in the lab. Maybe a little bit of extra distance in a 6-minute walk test or a slightly faster speed in a 10-meter walk test. But I think it's important for us to really recognize how those changes can impact patients on a much larger scale when they're compounded or compiled over a whole day or even a lifetime.
The thing I would respond to that is, in the clinic, walking an additional 100 meters doesn't mean much. But if that 100 meters gives you a reserve, a capacity that you can walk an additional 8,000 steps in the real world, that's a meaningful change. So I don't focus on the 100-meter change. I focus on what that means for the individual in terms of their ability to do more in the real world. And I think it goes back to, fundamentally speaking, people post-stroke are like these Hummer big vehicles that take up so much energy to walk that they don't walk. And if you can make them more efficient, more stable, faster, they will do more in the real world. So this is where, talk about the person engaging in the real world because of that 100 meters, not just 100 meters. This is not stuff that only I've published on. This is cross populations, older adults through individuals with stroke and Parkinson's disease. It's the more you can walk, the more you will, that better quality of life that you will have. It's just, that's not, an argument I'm making, that's everyone's making.
Absolutely, and it's definitely something that we all need to keep in mind. You also sort of brought up a spoiler for your next talk at the very end by introducing the exosuit in one of your last slides. And so I'm curious, for clinics that are new to using Restore, and again, I'm sure your next talk will expand on this a lot further, but do you have any recommendations for how they should start using the exosuit? How to tune it, what activities should they be doing, maybe what cues they should be giving? Anything from your experience that you can talk about right now?
So talking in as a clinician, not a researcher, I would stick to tried and true principles of individualization and progression. So individualization means you meet the patient where they are. So you don't give a cookie cutter program, you match the restorer to what they need. And that's either the assistance that they need, the magnitude, or the context. If they have trouble taking steps, you put them on the treadmill. If they can step, then, and they have challenges with overground stability and support, you put them over ground. So that individualization is the first principle. And then progression. This is something that's fundamental to any kind of exercise program. You progress them. And now with the exosuit, you can do a couple things with progression. You can progress the environment, so treadmill to overground, stepping over obstacles, all that fun stuff. Or you can progress by reducing the assistance levels. You let them train for a period of time with high levels of assistance, and over time you grade it away. All these details, they'll have to be fleshed out, but the idea of individualization and progression are things that are very fundamental to good rehab, and the exosuit does a great job of enabling it for propulsion. You can do individualization progression with other modalities. This is a really cool one.
Awesome. Lou, thank you so much for taking the time to share this fantastic presentation with us. I know that I learned a lot, and I hope all of our viewers did as well. And we'll look forward to talking with you again a little bit later in this series to hear about some of your research from your lab with exosuits.
Good. Thanks, guys. Good luck with everything.
And to all our viewers, hope you tune in with us again next week, and have a great week, everyone.